It was a routine stop, or so they thought. A few corrupt cops, with badges and power, spot a black man walking down a quiet street. They pull over, thinking they can intimidate him like they've done countless others. But what they don't know is that this man isn't just another target. He's a former Marine, trained in discipline and control, someone who's faced far worse than their petty games. As the officers begin their aggressive tactics, they're about to meet someone who won't back down. Little do they know, they're picking a fight with someone who's already fought for his life. What happens next will leave them questioning everything. Stay tuned to see how this shocking encounter unfolds when the tables turn in the most unexpected way. Will the cops get away with their cruelty, or will they face the consequences? Watch to find out. The man, whose name is Marcus, had spent years serving in the military, fighting for a country that often turned a blind eye to his struggles once he returned home. After his discharge, he tried to live a quiet life, but that wasn't easy for a black man in a city where racism ran deep, especially in the hands of the local police. That afternoon, as he walked down the street, he never expected the familiar feeling of fear creeping back into his chest, the same feeling he'd gotten used to as a young man, constantly looking over his shoulder. The officers had no real reason to stop him, but to them, his presence was enough. They were used to bending the rules, bullying anyone they could. What they didn't anticipate was Marcus's quiet defiance. He wasn't going to back down this time, but as the confrontation escalated, it became clear that things weren't going to end without a fight. As the officers surrounded Marcus, their smug grins and mocking words echoed in his ears. They were used to this routine, pulling over someone they could intimidate without consequence. But Marcus had seen much worse during his time in the military, and he knew how to control his emotions in even the most stressful situations. Still, as the officer in charge, Officer Thomas, barked orders and pushed Marcus for answers, a dark feeling crept up his spine. They were trying to provoke him, trying to make him react. But Marcus remained calm, his military training kicking in. He knew better than to give them an excuse. What they didn't know was how deeply his experience as a black man had shaped him. He had learned to pick his battles carefully, but something about this moment felt different. He could see in the eyes of one of the younger officers, Officer Daniels, that he wasn't fully convinced of the harassment. It was almost like there was a crack in the uniformed wall, but Marcus couldn't be sure. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm was waiting to break. Marcus's mind raced as he weighed his options. He could feel the weight of his military training, urging him to keep his cool, to walk away if possible. But the longer they pushed, the harder it became to stay silent. He was caught between wanting to protect himself and not letting the system break him like it had so many others. Officer Thomas seemed to sense the shift in Marcus, leaning in closer with a sneer, demanding answers. His voice was full of condescension, but there was an underlying note of fear. Fear that Marcus wasn't going to let this slide, and it wasn't just about the stop anymore. It was about everything Marcus had endured, every injustice, every unfair interaction, every time he had to hold his breath and keep walking, head down, so he wouldn't make waves. But this time, Marcus wasn't backing down. The officers were about to learn that when you push a man to his limits, you don't always get the reaction you expect. The moment hung in the air, charged with something darker than the usual tension Marcus had come to expect. Officer Thomas was in his face now, so close that Marcus could feel his breath, could see the veins pulsing in his neck. The other officers were watching, waiting for a misstep, a moment where they could escalate. But Marcus stood his ground, his eyes steady, his fists clenched at his sides. "What's your problem?" Thomas growled, his voice low but full of venom. "You think you can just walk around here, doing whatever you want? You're nothing, just another thug." The words stung, cutting through the years of control Marcus had fought so hard to build. But he didn't react. Not yet. The younger officer, Daniels, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking between his partner and Marcus. He seemed torn, like he wasn't sure if he should be doing this, if this was right. Marcus caught that brief look, and for a split second, he thought maybe this could end without more violence. Maybe Daniels was different. Maybe this wouldn't escalate the way it always did. But that hope was dashed the moment Thomas barked at Daniels. "Get him." The words were like a signal, and suddenly, the officers were closing in around Marcus. One of them grabbed his arm, yanking him roughly. It was enough to snap the last of Marcus's restraint. He spun, using the movement to break free, his military instincts coming alive. He didn't strike. He didn't need to. But he moved with the precision of someone who had learned to defend himself in the worst possible situations. It wasn't a fight. Not yet. But it was clear things were about to turn violent. The tension was a live wire, crackling in the air. Daniels hesitated, looking again at his partner, unsure. But Thomas's voice sliced through the confusion. "Don't let him get away. We don't back down, you hear me?" Marcus took a step back, his mind racing. He wasn't just fighting for his own freedom anymore. This was bigger than that. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his every sense heightened. He wasn't sure how far this would go, but one thing was certain. This was the point of no return. He couldn't walk away from this fight. Not anymore. Not when everything he had ever feared seemed to be rising up before him. The younger officer, Daniels, was still frozen. His eyes met Marcus's one last time, and for just a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Would he stand with his partner, or would he see this for what it was? A man, trying to survive in a world that was determined to break him. The answer hung in the air, just out of reach, as the officers began to close in once again. Just as the officers inched closer, preparing to forcefully subdue Marcus, the unmistakable sound of sirens cut through the tension. It was a momentary pause, but it changed everything. As the plainclothes officer took another step toward him, Marcus felt trapped in a vice of uncertainty. The tension in the air was so thick it was suffocating. This wasn't just about corrupt cops anymore. It was about something far deeper, something far more dangerous. And Marcus had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. The plainclothes officer stood just a few feet away now, his eyes locked on Marcus, studying him like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Marcus felt a knot in his chest, his mind racing. He had seen this man before, but the memories were foggy, fragments of a past he'd tried to bury. But now, in the heat of the moment, it all came rushing back. This wasn't just some random officer. It was Sergeant Jansen, a man from his unit. A man who had been there during the worst of it, during the battles they fought together. The same man who had watched others fall, but who had also made it out unscathed. Marcus's gut tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. A murmur swept through the courtroom, and Miss Carter shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, I didn't know," she admitted, her voice laced with unease. Her mother never mentioned. She stopped, as if suddenly realizing something. "She only told me to bring her here today. She said it was important." The judge's stomach turned. Why today? Why now? And then, a court officer stepped forward, holding a sealed envelope. "Your Honor, this was left at the front desk. It's addressed to you." With trembling hands, he took the envelope, his fingers brushing over the familiar handwriting on the front. As he peeled it open, a single thought consumed him. What secret had been hidden from him all these years? The judge's hands shook slightly as he unfolded the letter. The familiar handwriting sent a wave of emotions crashing over him. His eyes scanned the first line, and for a moment, the noise of the courtroom faded into a distant hum. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it's time for you to know the truth. Asterisk. His chest tightened. The letter continued, revealing what he never saw coming. The woman he once loved had kept a secret from him, a daughter. Their daughter. She had been battling an illness, and knowing her time was running out, she had done the only thing she could. She sent the little girl to find him. The weight of it all sank in as he looked up at the child, his child, standing there, waiting for him to say something. Before he could speak, the girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a locket. "Mommy said you'd remember this," she whispered. The moment his eyes landed on it, his breath caught. It was the same locket he had given her mother years ago, a token of love he thought had been lost forever. The courtroom was silent, waiting, and in that moment the judge knew his life would never be the same again. The judge's throat tightened as he reached for the locket. His fingers brushed against the cool metal, and memories flooded back. Laughter, late-night conversations, promises he thought would last forever. He swallowed hard and looked at the little girl, who stared back with hopeful eyes. He had spent years making decisions for others, ruling on what was fair, what was just. But now, the biggest decision of his life wasn't written in law books. It was standing right in front of him, waiting for an answer. Slowly, he knelt to her level. "I remember," he whispered, his voice